Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. On this edition, we got a great writer, Oliver Bateman, who writes for The Binger. What? Let me look. Let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Oliver Bateman, who writes for The Ginger Snap. What does this say? Write this down again for me. It's Oliver Bateman, who writes for The Ringer. I don't hear any shouting anymore from the back, so it must be correct. Oliver Bateman from The Ringer on this week's edition of The Outmoded. What is it? Let me look. Oh, yeah. The Outdated Wrestling Hour. It's Ginchy. Forgive the confusion from our staff announcer once again. Hi, this is Bob Smith, and welcome back to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We are glad you are back. I'm really excited about this particular show because I have just discovered, through our friend who was on our show a few weeks ago, Ian Douglas, a website called The Ringer. Now, I was blissfully unaware of The Ringer. And another great writer named Oliver Lee Bateman also writes there. He's our guest on today's show. But most of all, I'm going to start with some hype. Go to The Ringer. What a great website. Tremendous journalism on a variety of topics, everything from current events to wrestling. You're going to want to check that out at your earliest convenience. So in any event, Oliver is our guest. He's got a lot to say and a great knowledge of wrestling. And it's another one of those freeform conversations. It's the hallmark of our, what we hope is a unique podcast. So get your beverage, get your snack, hang in there with us through 29 seconds of Joe Walsh. And we will be right back right after this.
This is Joe Walsh. One thing I do when I'm not playing rock and roll is get on the air as an amateur radio operator. Also called ham radio, is a communication service provided by ordinary people just like you and me. We have a national emergency communication system in place 24/7, 365. Find out more about amateur radio at arrl.org/What is ham radio? See you on the air.
Okay, guys, you realize a few weeks ago we had Ian Douglas on the show, the prominent and prolific wrestling writer. Of course, it's just half of what you describe about Ian. We have a gentleman who's just like him with us. They both work for an incredible website I'm just discovering called The Ringer. There's a lot of great wrestling content. If you've never seen The Ringer, you've got to check it out. And this is Oliver Lee Bateman. Oliver, thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Glad to be on.
First of all, do you have any idea who I was or am? I've had 3 guests come on the show, didn't have a clue who I was anymore.
I'm sure that you were really impacting my life when I was like 5 to 10, because from like 87 to, I don't know if it fits in this window, from like 87 to 95, 96, I was reading PWI and the other magazines some of the magazines that were out, Inside Wrestling, whatever was on the newsstand, or whatever. I said times I had subscriptions. It must have been some of your stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. I was with PWI from 88 to full-time to 93, and then 2 more years freelancing for them. And then I moved on to Wrestling Main Event. I actually worked on the first and second WCW magazines. The second one specifically for WCW. And every time I would try to walk away from it, my phone would ring. So I had a good reputation in the business, being a writer could actually write and file things. I think that's all it was, really.
I've even got some copies upstairs. One's from '92, and it's got Roddy Piper on the cover. I just saw it. Roddy Piper speaks out. There's another one, '88. I don't know. I dug these out because we were going to talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was the Four Horsemen, like late '88, something like that on the cover. It must have been. I mean, if you were touching that stuff, I was reading it with really no idea of how. And like to me, how were the storyline? Like, I mean, you're like to me, I just assumed a lot of the story ideas must be coming from. I didn't know where they were coming from. How much is it, the guy suggesting them, or are you just making them up? I don't know.
No, I will tell you right now that 90% of what we wrote about, other than my indie bent, when I was there, I liked to cover the indies more than NWA and WWF because I was just more interested in the indies. It's new. It was all new and fresh to me. 90% of the stuff other than what I came up with on my own, Bill Apter was the conduit between all those promotions and our office. He was like a gad about everybody knew Bill. They would give him direction, and we would kind of take the direction and kind of exploit it and make articles out of it and stuff like that. If you read an interview with Piper around 88, that was legit. I think
92. This
92.
I was just flipping through. It's 92.
Yeah, I conducted that interview. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was at the time they were doing, was that They Live era right there?
It's a little after. He's back in the WWF.
No, that can't be it then, because the one I did was around the time late.
I really do scare Flair, and I scare Hogan. An exclusive PWI interview. And who wrote this press conference? Roddy Piper. Who wrote this?
Beats me. I'm old. I don't remember things anymore.
But yeah. Andy Rodriguez has a Cactus Jack thing in there.
There you go.
Let's see. No, I mean these magazines, man. Like these magazines actually had a story behind them because my mom was desperate to not have me reading them, and my dad, my dad was a car dealer, and what he said to me was, you could read or watch whatever you want, as long as you can tell me why you're doing it, and if it's sell the stories to me, and if they're interesting, then I'll let you read it or I'll let you watch it. And so pro wrestling was one of those things where my mom was always eager to kind of get it out of the house. I think Ian had something similar, but my dad, unlike his dad, my dad was like, you can have any kind of entertainment that you want if you can tell me why it's interesting or worthwhile and make it work for me, package it for me. So I'd read the stories, which are already packaged, and then I'd tell him, oh, well, this is about this or that's about that. And that gave him he felt like, if his kid was actually engaged with it, who cares what it is?
Right. You're reading. Yeah, you're reading too, right. Yeah.
So I'd read them cover to cover, but it's funny to think you were working on that stuff, or even funnier to think of Bill Apter kind of masterminding all the pieces of content that are coming into that.
Oh yeah, he would arrange the photo sets from our different freelance photographers around the country. He shot himself. We had a couple more staff photographers like Roy London, and it was quite a time. If you can imagine an actual newsroom for wrestling and boxing, we all sat on the same floor of a building that was owned by Stanley Weston, and the boxing department was on one side editorially, and the wrestling department. And there were 5 of us in wrestling and 4 of them in boxing, and we managed to put out something like 12 monthly magazines together. 12 different titles, I should say.
So it is Apter interviewing him in that piece. So that is, at least it's listed.
That sounds about right. Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. But in any event, you see, I really enjoy talking to people like you because back in the day when I did wrestling magazines, where I was involved with wrestling magazines, the London publications were different for a very simple reason. I feel a lot of the other titles that weren't our brand. Now, you can say what you want about the way we mash the content up. It's not even content I'm talking about. But we were all seasoned journalists and writers before we got into the wrestling magazines. We all had credentials. A lot of our staffers worked for Newsday. Some worked for other national publications.
Okay.
Whereas I think your let's say your Norman Kaiser magazines look like they were written by wrestling fans trying to be writers. And now I'm just saying, as far our readability, I think, was way over anything else that was on the newsstand. You know, we were real sticklers for grammar and syntax and style and stuff that I'm sure most wrestling magazines didn't give a rat's ass about. So I think that's what set us apart is our readability factor. Do you kind of agree with that, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were something that I was reading at that time. And like, I look back at what I might have been reading from, and I was reading that magazine. That was one of the magazines, that family of mags. I was reading that from like when I could start reading, like, and was really reading grown up stuff at like 5 until I was like 12. And so, and I wasn't reading crap. If I look back at the, young adult books or other things I was reading, whatever I was drawn to was, if I go back to it and look at it now, it was generally pretty darn good. It was generally decent. Like it was a good version of whatever it was.
Right.
And, so in some cases I'm revisiting that, not this, but like, because she doesn't like wrestling, but, revisiting other things with my daughter. I'm like, oh, well, this holds up. Well, this was pretty good. So I'd have to probably put that in the same category. Because like I said, I was flipping through them the other day and yeah, they feel like a magazine. You know what I mean? They have that.
Right.
They're not just, and I was also, there was like I said, there was a debate in my household about them showing up. And there were other junkier magazines in that family, or not that family, but there were other junkier wrestling magazines that didn't make their way into the house. Now, we did occasionally have the WWF magazine in there, but that wasn't terrible either.
No,
It was made
no,
up.
no, that
it was not.
no,
It was not poorly done. But
no,
there were some junky ones on the newsstands.
Wasn't Keith Greenberg on the staff for quite a while on the magazine? Because he's a real journalist.
Yeah, he's good, and all of his co-authored books are good. His books are good. He's just completely solid. I mean, and, guys like Vince Russo came out of the magazine, and they're solid for what, you know what I mean? Like it was a solid, and like there were people that were hired on there in the '80s that came off regular magazines,
right?
Just like you were saying about your group, like they. So those were decent, but there was some junk on the newsstand. There was mainly like pinups and things like that. You know what I mean? Like glossy pictures and pinups.
But I never put them down because there's a place for that.
No,
I mean, a lot of wrestling fans would buy, let's say, Wrestling's Main Event because they want to cut the centerfold out, and put it on a wall. I get that. That makes all the sense in the world.
If you're a fan,
and I used to love the Ring Wrestling and Wrestling Review because they had those agate pages in the back growing up with all the statistics from all around the world, all the match results. I loved that stuff. It was just meat and potatoes, like looking at box scores for baseball as a kid. It was the same feel. So I listen. I don't put anybody down or any of the other magazines down, but I just felt that what we did was different than what everybody else did, and they coveted good writers and editors, believe it or not. People who had some kind of a track record. I mean, I had just won an award for an interview I did with Mike Tyson, a big award, a New York State Newspaper Publishers Association Sports Writing Award. And I was there.
In that career was that championship Tyson or like
no? It was
coming up Tyson.
Coming up Tyson.
Wow,
20 years old, 19
ago.
to 20, yeah. And I was there I was working in Catskill, New York. Our newspaper was right across the street from the boxing club. It was nirvana, man. It was. I stepped in it. Yeah, I really stepped in it. I don't think it was so much that I was such a great writer. I just think I had access.
Yeah. Well, you would there, yeah.
I mean,
but that's a great. That's a great little piece of history.
I remember eating. There was a pizzeria right next to the boxing club. I remember eating pizza with Rooney and Tyson. So it's like it was just small town living. It was a whole different scene. So I'm lucky I stepped in it. But let's get on to you, because you
answered some questions I've always had though. Like I kind of wanted to know about the backstage of some of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I liked about working there is they kind of gave me free reign once I established myself there, and I could write about anything I felt like writing about, which is great. Like if I saw something from some smaller federation of television, if we could get the pictures, I could cover it. And I used to write the introducing features in the wrestling magazine. So I was the first person to give Sid Vicious his first publicity, Dustin Rhodes his first publicity, Rob Van Dam his first publicity, all in that era.
PWI, what I wanted out of that magazine as a little kiddo was I wanted the stories on people I couldn't see every week.
Yeah.
I could see less. I don't know why. Like WWF Magazine, I felt like when I was 6 or 7, we moved to North Carolina when I was 7, and I began watching TBS more. But like when I was a really little kiddo, like I wanted to see stories and read stories about people I didn't see as much. So that magazine, and then later on, I was still curious if I didn't know as much about a particular story or character or whatever was getting profiled in there. That's what got me going. I was like, man, Memphis stuff in particular, right? Like I didn't have video access to what was going on there, but they always got publicity.
Yes. Are you kidding? When I was there, I actually used some of my vacation time on my own dime to go to Memphis, and I hung out with that whole crew for a week.
I mean, that was a
1991.
total mystery to me,
Hmm.
except for the fact that, like Lawler would wrestle in the AWA or things like that. You'd hear these, you'd hear these bits and pieces, but I never saw footage of that as a
Right,
kid.
right. Yeah. Well, you see, that's why the magazines. Even when Bruno Sammartino gave his acceptance speech at the WWE Hall of Fame, he credited the magazines for
Oh,
for
he was a
his
magazine champion,
yeah,
cover cover man.
and he credited that publicity with getting him, well, to be honest, gigs overseas. Because they wouldn't have known any other way. Even into the early 90s, I think the wrestling magazines were still a conduit. It was, cable had taken off, but there were still territories then. When the territories died, I think the magazine's importance kind of waned. It didn't matter who was publishing a wrestling magazine. You needed territories because, again, people wanted to read about stuff they couldn't see.
Yeah,
And
that was honestly, that's what pulled me. Like, that's why I pulled that magazine month over month. The other stuff was interesting, and like I kind of liked that it was enmeshed in a world that I did know. So like
mhm,
and that meant that somehow it could link up. So I might read about Abdullah the Butcher, and then Abdullah the Butcher shows up in time for Halloween Havoc,
right.
and he's working an angle, but I don't know what else he's doing. Like that, that's like one of those mystery men, right? Like in '89 for me. But he looks like that look is so phenomenal in magazine pictures and stuff.
Oh, gosh.
Your head's filling in because the magazines, like you said, they really depended on those pictures, and one picture's worth 1,000 words. But
Yeah.
a picture and a story together that of something that I couldn't see, I honestly, that was better than what I would eventually see when I watched it. I hate
Hmm.
to say it. Like sometimes the story and the pictures and the
Yep.
like build up for the guy, especially Abdullah, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
'Cause
He's whirled into himself. I'm telling you.
he's
See,
more.
listen. I was fascinated. I lived in upstate New York growing up, and I used to get the Utica TV station on my rabbit ears. I couldn't get it any other way. If I turned the rabbit ears just right in my bedroom, I could pick up. And it was the National Wrestling Federation. He was just really starting out as around, what are we looking at? 71, 72, 73 at the latest?
Oh, so he probably was moving a little bit better then.
Oh, he was moving great. But here's the deal, he was even more ferocious then. I mean,
Okay.
I watched a match where he's literally like biting a guy in the esophagus, and I'm like, and he was bleeding. Now, knowing Abby, that probably wasn't even a work, So I'm like, God Almighty, what am I looking at here? I mean, this is like 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon. You're watching a guy trying to kill another guy.
That is fantastic. That is fantastic, man. You're getting some color at that 3 p.m.
Yeah, I mean that was incredible. I mean, the guy obviously was okay. I mean,
Yeah, sure, sure. But like just as a kid to see that, it's fair. You know what I mean? Like that was the interesting thing about the randomness of wrestling, right? You're tuned into a weird station. You could barely get it. This mysterious thing's happening. This guy looks very unusual. He's biting a man's neck. You know
yeah,
what, you know what
yeah.
I mean? Your head just fills in
You
the
had
rest.
listen
What the
when
heck
you're
is
not
this?
when you're not fully formed, when you're in like late junior high school, early high school years, and you're really starting to get into this stuff. Like I remember seeing Blassie in '72 when he returned to the WWF, and he was just gnawing people's heads open on television. Then they put a big X over the screen that said censored because they didn't want you seeing all the gore, which Apter tells me they needed to do. They had gotten complaints from TV affiliates, so they had to literally optically censor the gory stuff. But not seeing it was as scary as seeing it. That there's a
Oh, absolutely.
psychological component to using that X on the screen.
Yeah, Freddie Blassie sharpens his fangs, this type
Yeah,
of
oh, there's
stuff.
a million pictures. I was just looking today
Such
at
a good
some
picture.
stuff.
The
Yeah,
pictures of that are so good.
they
This is
are.
the whole thing, Bob. I'm glad that you brought this up just because like I talked about this with Ian once. You brought up my buddy Ian Douglas. I talk about this with him from time to time. I know that he can't go back, but I liked wrestling better when you had to track down the info or track down the material or track down the stories and piece it all together in your own head. Today I can go on YouTube, Online World of Wrestling, all these different things, cage match, and quickly run down a guy's career if I need to or something. You know what I mean? Like I can quickly and so that kind of cheapened, or I can just ask like Phil Schneider, right? We know Phil Schneider. He also writes for The Ringer, and he's been tape trading forever. Oh, do you have this footage of this guy in like '88? And he does somehow, and he sends you a Google Drive link. There's no like that's great. I would, it's amazing it exists, but that also cheapens the whole thing about, like, to me, it was all about the hunt and the discovery back in the day. You don't have that anymore.
Well, the name of this show is the Outdated Wrestling Hour, and I'll tell you why I'm outdated and my sensibility is outdated is because now they have a major pay-per-view event in WWE, and they'll have a press conference where they detail everything they just did, bring you back behind the curtain, use real names, the whole Michigas. It's all out in the open now. There are no secrets. It's like going to a magic show, and then at the end of the thing, they tell you how they did it.
I get why they do that, but again, Ian and I always talk about this. So we message back and forth online, and Bob, it just isn't the same. It's an interesting product. It's good.
Yeah,
It's
it is.
professionally made.
Mhm.
But the mystery was kind of what kept me going, and I love to write about it today. But usually, I'm writing about the past.
Right. I noticed that on your list of
Yeah.
the list of columns you've
Yeah.
done. Most of it is you're looking back at things, and I really got into it just today. I was going through the list of stuff. I mean, and by the way, for you folks,
Yeah.
I want to tell the listeners here, this is the place to go for some great classic wrestlers and looks at their careers. I'll just name a few that you have written about, Oliver, like Ole Anderson,
Yes, that was a good piece.
Bray Wyatt, Terry Funk,
Yeah.
Jerry Jarrett,
Yeah.
Lenny Poffo, Superstar Graham, New Jack. I read that today. It was awesome.
Yeah.
You really opened
His
my
like
eyes. To stuff.
his wife, when he passed, loved that article and messaged me on Instagram. I'll tell you something I do with every one of those. And Ian and I, when he co-authors one with me, we always make sure we do it, but I always do it. The New Jack thing, I tracked down New Jack's college football information at Clark University. Because you wouldn't think New Jack played college football. Right? He says it in his autobiography, right? But most people, it's pro wrestling, so you figure, half of this is bullshit.
Mhm.
But no, when I see something like that, I confirm it. So his wife wrote to me and was like, I was trying to look for this stuff for years. Where did you find it? And I put the clips in the article. And that, to me, when somebody does that, that's when you nailed it. Or when Paul Orndorff died,
Mhm.
and Brian Blair, the great Brian Blair, helped us, his friend, and one half of the Killer Bees, helped me and through Ian write the Mr. Wonderful obituary. We were able to confirm that a story that Brian Blair started telling me the story about. It would have sounded like nonsense, Paul Orndorff arrested for fighting a bunch of guys in a bar, just him and his brother beating up a bunch of guys and like 7 police officers. But there are actually newspaper stories, which we included in the article, confirming the thing that like Brian Blair was telling like a folk tale. So I put that in the article and confirmed that one piece of history for Paul Orndorff. So with every obituary, we try to confirm one little piece of the story, or maybe 2 pieces or 3 pieces. Like we confirmed that when Ian and I did Ole Anderson, we confirmed he played football at Colorado University. He was at Colorado Buffalo, and that he was only 5'10". That's what he's listed at in their media guide. But he played college ball. You know what I mean? Like guys, especially in wrestling, would just say that. A lot of times it's BS, so you always like to check it. But
I was surprised to read it too.
Jerry Jarrett, great, one of like a legendary high school football players of Tennessee. Sounds like, look at that guy. Sounds like BS, right?
Mhm.
No, massive like record of his accomplishments as a football player and multi-sport athlete. Just like Jeff Jarrett often says that he was good. Jeff Jarrett did indeed play 1 year of college basketball. He says, you look at him, he's like, no way, but he did. So that family, very athletic. But I always like to confirm something like that and put it in the story.
Yeah.
But with the New Jack thing, it was so gratifying because his wife reached out and was like, we were looking for stuff about him, about the football, which wouldn't seem like it would matter that much to New Jack. He never really talked about it in later interviews, but he had a decent career, Clark, and pretty good player. Probably because even for somebody who didn't care that much about playing it. So it was kind of cool that they were able to take those articles and get that. Or Brian Blair, when he saw that newspaper article about Paul Orndorff and the bar fight, he thought that was just awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, so when I do these stories, it's kind of great because sometimes there's a lot of kayfabe and you can just kind of pass over it. So more than like when the New York Times or somebody does the obituary, the Ringer, the publication we write for, is always great. They always give us such a huge word count. 3,000 words, 5,000 words.
Wow.
And they're by the word place. They pay by the word, so that's a big investment for them on those. So I always try to fill it out with a, really interesting, like there's going to be the stuff that has to be in there, about Kevin Sullivan or something. But there's also going to be like some vintage newspaper articles I track down or some other weird stuff or some fact that I can confirm. And that to me is what makes those fun.
Yeah, but you know what? And this is true. There are 8 gazillion wrestling news websites out there, and they're all fighting each other to get stuff out first, just like the media and news does these days. But I get the sense, yes, from reading those articles that you've come up with, that you won't print it unless it's finished and the facts are sealed.
We do fact check them too. There's a fact checking team at the Ringer. They have everything that's in there. So like I have they have the clips of the newspaper articles. If it's audio or, Ian or I interviewed somebody, they look at our notes or they check, if you mention somebody won this title or that title, they'll check that. And takes a little longer, but it's just it's a different kind of product from like, you're right. You're 100% right. A lot of the publications when somebody dies, especially in wrestling, obituaries they get a lot of views, they get a lot of clicks, but our editor there at the Ringer, our editors, Cal and David Shoemaker, they take their time. They want these to be researched pieces, and I like it. I think it's good to have that alternative to what's out there because you can watch the 2-minute WWE clip. You can read the little squib that comes out at another publication, or even the New York Times when they do like a couple paragraph obituary. That's nice for the family of the guy, but you can go to our obituary and it'll be super extensive. It'll, at least like you said about Kevin Sullivan, as somebody, you've been in the business a long time, you've edited a ton, you've written a ton, you read it, you're like, yeah, that covered it. That is comprehensive. That's what you can do in a day on this guy dying. And it's very comprehensive. And we have Mike Rotunda in there that Ian interviewed. We have got, we've got Brian Blair in there. We've even got Tyree Pride in there, and the Bahamas angle, which great. Is coming from Ian, and that's his book on the Bahamas. So like,
don't say anything more because I want people to read that section because that is fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating.
It's only there. It's there, and in more detail in Ian's book on the Bahamas wrestling. Like, but it's only there. Like that's the only place you're going to find it online. And so that's a detail. That's one of those details, like only in our piece. And I hate to put it over like that, but that is the cool part about those obituaries. There's always a couple of things in each one to find otherwise. And that to me makes it so much fun. I hate, when somebody passes away and you got to turn it around. We like to turn it around fairly quickly, but we actually finished writing that one, for example, on Friday night. And, our editors went through it on Saturday. The desk at the Ringer that does fact checking went through it on Sunday. So it came out Monday morning. So there's a pretty long process to get it out the door, but that's, a lot slower than every other place that pushes something out. But to get something out that long, like when Scott Hall died, I wrote that was 6,200 words. And one cool fact in there, Bob, that I had not seen spelled out anywhere else, and I included the newspaper clips. The guy that Scott Hall killed in that love triangle situation early in his career, you would wonder, why was Scott Hall so afraid of this particular guy? Well, I went through the newspaper archives, and 2 months earlier, that guy had killed a guy.
Really?
Yeah, he killed him and got off for justifiable homicide down in Florida. And sure enough, Scott Hall killed this guy and got off for justifiable homicide. So, of course, he probably was worried that he was going to be in a dangerous situation. He was going to confront a murderer.
Jeez.
So the man that he killed was actually a murderer. And that really should, not that it's still an awful situation, but that probably should change how dangerous that situation was for Scott Hall.
No kidding. Yeah.
But I guess he still felt terrible remorse about it. But the guy he had killed was known for having like a hair trigger temper and had actually killed somebody.
Jeez.
What a weird fact, though, right?
The hair is standing up my arms just listening to this. So
and Scott Hall is a big man. Like that is not a man you trifle with. But
legit 6'7", I'd say.
Yeah, just a giant man.
Yeah. Hey, listen. I got to give you guys your props, and I'll tell you why. You may find this anecdote funny. So I start this podcast January of last year.
Okay.
Right? My first solo podcast. I'd done a different podcast for a year before that. So I'm doing this thing, and one of my earlier guests, who was just about to publish his autobiography, was Todd Gordon.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Todd is God.
So he puts out a bunch of pretty inflammatory comments about Paul Heyman to me,
Ooh.
not in the book, but to me. All right.
Yeah. Okay. So
I didn't force it out of him. So he says a few things like Paul this, Paul that. It gets picked up by one of these SEO sites, right? This is one of these SEO wrestling news sites.
Okay.
And they get the name of the podcast wrong, and nothing else is mentioned. And they do pull the quotes, but they got those right. But everything else, it looked like a junior high school kid put this thing out. And here's why I'm not big on wrestling news websites. It got picked up by like 9 other sites with the same mistakes in it.
Yes. Yeah. They basically
they just copy off each other.
Yeah,
They literally cut and paste.
Control C, Control Control V.
And I tell another story. I am not writing. I was in professional writing and publishing from full time from 1983 to 2021. If I got to do SEO, I ain't going back. End of story. To me, it's not writing. It's not journalism. It's selling people stuff, and I got no interest in it. Right now, I'm working for a sports media company. I got no interest in going back if that's what my career choice is. I'm not doing it. I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't like it.
Well, Ian and I do it in our day jobs. So, like, I'm a senior content manager for a big consulting company. So I write and I do their research reports and I pull, I do a lot of, and I have to build in SEO and I have to use all these tools and I build in SEO to a lot of what we write. We work on rankings. So with my freelance, Bob, the writing that's really near and dear to my heart, my role is I'm not going to do any of this if I have to behave like that. You know what I mean? Like I'll do it for good money. In my day job, I have a good day job. I like my boss. I like my company.
You know what?
If I have to do that with these like the obituaries, those are like anti-SEO.
Yeah, but you're making a good point. If it's not journalism, maybe I would do it. If I was writing, if somebody hired me to give me good money to write ad copy, I'd do that. But what I'm saying is, if you're writing something factual. I don't want to make it part of a pitch or a clickbait.
I'm not going to rework the opening paragraph. I would never write for any. I'm not going to rework the head. The editors might want to rework the head. Where they that's up to them. But I'm not You know what I mean? Like I'm producing this. It's going to be what I want to write on the topic. We'll go back and forth on the if it's a question of facts or a question of just readability, we'll go back and forth. But with my actual freelance journalism. I'm not in it to produce viral pieces. Like I've had a few pieces over the years that have gone viral, but not through any. But that's just been through whatever the topic was, not through any efforts on my part. Because I think that stuff's so cheesy. Like when it goes viral by design,
right?
That just stinks. But I have seen the same thing happen with and I don't want to put down the wrestling sites. They're just pushing out content, and that's kind of what they do. But I often do, and Ian was on one of them last year, but usually the Ringer gives me the WWE Hall of Fame announcement articles. So like WWE will do a Hall of Fame announcement. They'll give the exclusive to one place or another. And when the Ringer gets it, my editors are like, Oliver, let's use this as an opportunity to make the announcement. But then we'll do the Steiner Brothers history piece, like a real piece.
Right.
Or we'll do, this year was Mike Rotunda and Barry Windham. And since Ian is working on a project with Mike Rotunda, that was perfect because Mike Rotunda is kind of, unfortunately, too, the Bray Wyatt piece. Like we have Mike Rotunda on call, so Mike Rotunda is in all these different things. But with the Hall of Fame announcements, the Hall of Fame announcement will come out. And then that will get the announcement part will get picked up by these aggregator sites, like Wrestling Scoops and Scoops of they have names like that, wrestling gossip, these types of things. And it's like this one paragraph, and they'll misspell your name, or they'll misspell the Ringer. It'll be like the Dinger, announced it. And then, like you said, the error in it will get picked up by the other 50 of them.
They just cut and paste, yeah.
And so you'll see the same weird text, and it's because they're all rushing to get out that piece and blast it out on their socials. They're not really journalism. They're just kind of like some kind of, I guess they
Well,
make money somehow.
here's how: all those pop-up ads that you
Mm.
don't dare click on.
Yeah, some of those. Well, I mean, some of those things, like if you click on any one of those, like Wrestling Scoops website, you click on it. I mean, it's a good thing I have a powerful computer because the
Yeah,
pop-ups would shut down
yeah,
an older
yeah.
PC.
It just takes over the whole screen, bonk, and the next thing you know, it's some kind of a word game they want you to buy, right? And it's like, how do I get out of this? Oh shoot, dude!
It's so bad,
I
dude.
play a Scrabble word game before I go to sleep at night to clear my head, and just
Right?
and every time I play this game, I play it on an iPad, and every time in between there's these 4-minute ads for the king is caught in the castle, and there's flames coming in, and do you want to buy this? And I'm like, no, but they won't let you shut it off for like 2.5, 3 minutes. And I'm like, by that point, I just throw the
It's
thing and I
always
go to
these
sleep.
same type of ads, like that same kind of name. Like I could almost picture what that ad is.
Yeah, yeah,
Sometimes it's like guys running across the screen shooting a gun or some weird thing, or
yeah.
like knights or some. It's always and it always yeah. It's just terrible. Like so, I
Or
miss the era of
yeah,
I like going back. I miss the era of when I could just hold the Pro Wrestling Illustrated in the hand.
yeah.
Yeah, there's ads in there, but I could just flip by them. I don't care.
Bring back
Uh,
the magazines with the Johnson Smith catalog ads in them, and I'll be happy, boy.
I think I remember Bill Apter's autobiography. I don't recall them being any ads for this in the 80s and 90s, but I think he wrote about like there being ads for, or there were in the Western magazines ads for that like women's apartment wrestling stuff.
Oh yeah.
One time, I don't remember that in the 80s and
Well, it
90s.
wasn't ads. Stanley Weston's put him in a failing title called Sports Review Wrestling at the time. I
Oh
guess it was the
wow.
early '80s. He just instituted it in every issue. You'd see models pretending to grapple with bras and panties on. Is basically what it was, and it worked. I hate to tell you, it worked.
Bill.
Bill hated it. The wrestlers hated it. Chief J Strongbow told him, "I will not be in that porno mag." Right. So it was a big deal. Poor Bill, because he's the one out there in the field, and he had to bear the brunt. Nobody liked it, and thankfully Stanley, I guess around 77, 70, finally threw the towel in on it.
It was
That was
big enough that
Stanley.
Bill had to
Stanley,
address it in his book, though. Bill
yeah.
had to deal with it.
Stanley Weston and Theo Arret, the California wrestling photographer, were the
Oh.
brain trust behind Apartment House Wrestling. And you know what? Those articles were the most twisted sexuality you will ever read. It was these weird things, these men gathering and,
What the
in this
heck?
apartment to watch these women in their savage fury. Oh God. It was like a cross between, and I won't say it. It was just so low rent. It really was.
But yeah, it definitely wasn't anything I was seeing by the mid 80s into the late 80s
No,
into to the
they
90s in
wised
the
up.
magazine.
Well,
But that,
I'm the lucky one. I joined in '88 when things got really serious in wrestling, and I was able to. We had to put our journalist hats on, once in a great while. I mean, we had the steroid trials in 91, 92 and all that stuff. So it wasn't good guy, bad guy at that point. You had to put your old news hat on again and cover real stuff and get real quotes. And I did a couple articles on wrestlers who had had personal tragedies, and I put my news hat back on it and did it straight because you don't want to exploit it, like
because you
something
would have
serious.
in that era started to have all the serious stuff like
Oh yeah, you had
Barry Von Erich's suicide, Hulk Hogan jumps companies, all the different things, the steroid trial, all the different things that were happening.
I was there for 3 of the Von Erich suicides, and when the third one occurred, I remember swinging my chair back. I used to have Annie Rodriguez and Craig Peters and Bill Apter sitting behind me going, I actually said, why am I doing this?
Those guys were good for the covers too. They were certainly a cover picture family.
Yes, well, they sold a lot of magazines. The Von Erichs were right after Hulk Hogan.
Another one of those families that I did not. I actually, when I was a history professor in Texas Arlington in 2015, I did a huge we had in our library, university library, all these photos of the Von Erich. So in 2015, I did this curated world class championship wrestling. From this guy was actually a jazz photographer, but he went to the wrestling in Fort Worth for a year and took photos from the fans' perspective. Like the wrestling magazine shots were one thing, but these were always shot to show what the fans were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But the Von Erichs are like in every shot because they're the featured attraction and they're talking to each other or they're pointing to attractive women in the crowd or things like that. And To his credit, Kevin Von Erich helped out and like identified people in the photos, and was really super helpful. Identified. He was just over Twitter. I'd send him a photo. He'd say, "Oh, that's this," or "That was this night." He remembered all this crap.
Mm-hmm.
But I did this thing, and I could not believe the crowd they drew in 2015 at the library exhibit. So we took up a floor in the library with all the photos, in a guidebook. And usually we would do these library photo exhibitions, and it'd be something obscure, and not many people would come. But they were averaging like 20 to 30 people a day during the month or two that this was open, signing the guidebook. That tells me if you put those on the magazines in '88. I'm sure that 87 or something like that. I'm sure that Kerry Von Erich was selling magazines.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Phenomenal physique. Kevin too. Phenomenal physique, great look. But what really got me was the photos of those guys, also taken by this guy too, all very striking. Like those guys were very the two Main brothers. Yeah, David's not in any of them, and I don't think. But I don't. This is '83, so I don't think he's died yet.
Right.
But Kerry and Kevin are in these photos, and those two guys are photogenic as heck.
Yeah. Are you kidding? Kerry came to our offices once just to visit. Yeah. You know what it was? It was when he was just joining the WWF.
Still had a good physique then, Lito. Even with
my God, yes. I know. I was about to say he looked like he was carved out granite. And we had a photo studio in the office, and Bill was taking photos of him and stuff because you could get away with it if he's like between contracts. So it was right before he signed. So we came and took a whole bushel basket full of photos of him, so we'd have it when he had signed with the W. Because we were thrown out. Our magazines were thrown out of WWF events for years.
Yeah, when did that start? Like, when did that? I don't remember. If there was overlap. There was never really overlap. I had to read WWF magazine to get the other stuff.
It was the expansion. As soon as they started publishing their own WWE magazine, we were OUT out. Persona.
I have some back issues where like it's like 82, 83, and I know like Jesse Ventura, and Adrian Adonis are on the cover, and Bob Backlund's on the cover. Right. But probably by the time Vince is in '84 and they're starting their own magazine, he's probably smartly saying, "I'm gonna consolidate coverage."
And no consolidate. He did his own coverage. That was
he has his magazine, right? So like, which I would read for the WWF stuff. Now I think you guys would have, some of those magazines that did. One of them, like Inside Wrestling, did the rankings. Would have the WWF rankings.
Oh yeah, but we continued to cover them as if nothing had ever happened, with some skilled photographers shooting from the third ring at Madison Square Garden as opposed to ringside, and I was one of them. And I'll tell you what, you can always tell when it was the years when we didn't have press credentials because you would see the ropes. Right? If you were at ringside, you would not see ropes. We had to shoot through the ropes, above the ropes, anything we could do to get a good vantage point.
Really does.
We were paying scalpers to get the best vantage point for photography seats that we could at the Garden, and we were sneaking long lenses in Subway sandwich bags. Like it looked like a submarine sandwich we were bringing with us. Wow. We were pretending to be like down in our luck.
That's a nice little piece of trivia. Now I'll go back and look at some of my old mags and see like, oh yeah, well look at that. And you do see that like the real primo shots are the guy's body, no ropes,
Right.
Like those are like the gold, ideally with the blood coming down, right?
Yeah, well,
that's the perfect cover shot.
Well, there's another thing you want to talk about that. We stopped using blood on the covers under threat of being thrown out by the distributor.
When did that start?
I would say that was early '80s, because the '70s covers, the '70s covers were nothing but blood. Nothing.
Incredible. And I would buy those from the back issue pages of the magazines. You could buy the different various ones had like you could buy the bundles of back issues or whatever. They'd come, but those were just so striking, blood on a bleached blonde head.
Right. Yeah. Flair, Dusty, those type of things. Yeah.
Just an incredible cover with blood. Like you couldn't have, like you just really want to know what that story is. What kind of match, what kind of feud or story could lead to this guy getting carved open like that?
But you know what? When we graduated from that to handsome baby faces on the cover.
Also great. All the Kerry
Von discovered that they sold too.
Yeah. All the Kerry Von Erich, like, oiled up, shirtless, like looking.
Yeah.
Those covers are fantastic.
Even in the early '80s, Tommy Rich. I mean,
that's a good looking.
The wrestlers got better looking And we found out that somehow that sold. I don't know if we had a female contingency of readers.
That
I don't
definitely
know that.
that's a really good point. That definitely changed between the 60s and the Tommy Rich Rock and Roll Express 80s. And it's kind of funny
Right.
to look back at the Rock and Roll Express because Robert Gibson and Ricky Morton are not like beautiful men like the way Kerry Von Erich is.
No, they're really
over,
not.
But
No,
they got
right.
over with the female fans just because look at the competition.
Right. Well, yeah, Tony
Ivan
Altamore,
Koloff.
Tony Altamore, or Ricky Morton, right? I mean, it's like
They really stood out
yeah.
comparatively.
Well, you know what? Too, they had a gift of gab, and they were almost hip for Southern guys. You know, they were hipper than the old.
And their energy
school.
when they came, and like Ricky's energy during the comeback.
Yeah,
Ridiculous, you know, or getting the energy when they were getting beaten down. They really had the mannerisms and stuff down.
Dave Rosenbaum, who worked for our magazine, used to love to tell the story of being in the arena when the Rock and Roll Express beat the Midnights to regain the NWA, and he said he saw couples embracing and people crying, and he's like, I don't believe what I was just seeing. These fans were really emotional about this. So they were not over; they were over. I mean, fans went nuts for the Rock and Roll Express and the Fabulous ones too. I
mean, the Fabulous ones I can get. Like,
yeah.
You know, because Kern, like he says in his autobiography, Kern was in phenomenal shape in his career at that point. Stan Lane was always in good shape.
Yep. Yeah.
Kern looked like $1 million in the Fabulous. Like that was a great gimmick. You know, the Rock and Rolls are they're not in the same. It's not the same caliber, but the Rock and Rolls are kind of like an evolution of that Tommy Rich comeback fire. That kind of fire. That babyface fire, the crowd loves that in the South, you know. Tommy Rich is also not like a supremely great looking guy. Pretty, you know, good kind of. He's not Kerry Von Erich, you know.
He wasn't Vern Gagne either, so you know.
No,
it's like you know what I'm saying.
You compare Tommy Rich to Vern Gagne or to the Bruiser.
Yeah,
looks. That's the thing. Like what that really is, and a really interesting point to even think about. Like those guys that were coming out of the '70s, Wahoo, they were so old looking.
They were old looking when they were young. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they had that grizzled face even early, and that was kind of what you'd expect from a wrestler, you know?
Right. And so when they got a little better looking, they really went over, especially in the South.
Like I'd expect somebody to look like Baron von Raschke, you know, that's a pro wrestler, you know, this kind of bald, or Ivan Koloff, you know, this kind of thing. But no, like
Steele, Joe LeDuc, you know, go down the list of those
French Angel
men, right? Yeah,
that's what
French, let's go way back. Yeah,
that's what, you know, if you ask somebody like my dad, oh, what's a pro wrestler? It would be that. Even Bruno's kind of like, you know, Bruno's big and you know in good shape, but even he's kind of like a meatball. You know what I mean? Kind of like a meatball compared to guys that would come down the line like Ricky Steamboat and
people. You know, being on the East Coast here, people. I'll never forever forget going to Manhattan for the first time and walking past a barber shop, an Italian barber shop, right in the middle of town. And I look in the window and they had a signed photograph of Bruno Sammartino right next to the cash register. I went, wow, Bruno really does own New York. And he did for about
great ethnic champion for that.
Oh, yeah. But you know what? He was a good looking guy, just in a rugged kind of a way. Yeah.
Rugged, but he also looked like an actual athletic world champion.
Well, he actually got in better shape as he got older. If you remember, he started almost pushing 300 pounds. By the time the early 80s were around, he was down to about 240.
Yeah, he leans out.
Because I could enhance my speed. I could enhance my speed while retaining my strength. Right? That's how he used to talk about it on interviews.
Well, yeah, he moved off. He also moved off like the insane powerlifting of early in his career. I mean, he comes in as like a real legit world-class powerlifter, legit 500-pound bench, legit 600 and some pound squat, like these real legit numbers for like a young kid.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, if you look at a picture of Ivan Koloff and Bruno Sammartino in the ring 1971 and look at them in 1981, they were two different people, both of them. They both shrunk on purpose.
Ivan Koloff got in really good shape too.
He did. He got great shape. Yeah.
I mean, by the time he's still wrestling in WCW in '88, I remember that he's still wearing the singlet, but he's got like a six pack. Like he actually,
really did change. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in '71, he's just a beefy. He's just beefy. Like Bruno's muscular, but Koloff's just kind of beefy. But by '88, Koloff looks very, very good. And he's also through the '80s, Ivan Koloff's like a good worker, like can work the long matches.
I never saw him do a bad match. Did you?
And that's the thing. As a kid, like I realized these matches that he's are good, but you would think he would just be kind of like he'd come out, he'd just be kind of like an attraction, kind of like a meatball, like a rush. You know what I mean? Like he didn't have to be good,
No,
but
it
he
never
was
happened.
actually a good.
It never
He's
happened. Yeah.
actually a good worker. And then guys like Crusher Khrushchev, who then is a good worker in the WWF as Smash, they're actually pretty good workers too. Bill Eadie is
Oh,
a
absolutely. Yeah.
superstar, and
Yeah.
as Axe. I talk about that with Ian a good bit. Those guys are like the Demolition Tag Team was actually two good workers.
They had to
I
be
think of
good.
them as attractions, but no, they're actually good. They have good, like WBF had a good working tag team on top because you have the Heart Foundation, like all the tag teams, the Killer Bees, like the WWF tag teams could all pretty much work. Strike Force,
Yeah.
um, the Bulldogs were getting like a little bit injured with Dynamite, but like they could all work.
There
All
was the
those
thing.
teams.
That's the thing about 80s WWF. If you look at a card, like on one of those old sheets
Yeah,
detailing the card, and you strip away the new names they gave the guys and think about who they were before they changed their names, that would have been an unbelievable all-star card, but it wasn't. It was the Berserker, nor the
John.
Barbarian. It was the Red
Well, he
Rooster,
had a
not
good
Terry
look.
Taylor. It was,
A great work. I mean, and a lot of them
yeah,
are great workers. Terry Taylor's a great example.
unbelievable worker. Yeah,
I mean, heck, Hacksaw Duggan in Mid South is a good worker. Like it,
yeah.
comes in and works good matches for Bill Watson. Is like a good. Where I wouldn't realize that until later when I tracked down. That was like one company that I tracked down a lot of tapes and footage for, and I was like, man, I didn't realize the $1 Million Man could work. Like I didn't realize how some of these guys were good workers in the WBF, and I didn't realize how good they were. Like Ted DiBiase is an example. He made all those matches that I was so interested in.
I forget
Rick
what year.
Rude.
I forget what year DiBiase became the $1 Million Man, but as recently as 1981, he was still plain old Ted DiBiase, the
Yeah.
Intercontinental Champion. And it's like then he re-shows up with it. We're supposed to forget who he was if you're a longtime fan, and all of a sudden he's a millionaire with a white limousine. I'm like, what?
I think he had a title in the WBF at some point, or he
He
was a
did the
contender for. Yeah,
Intercontinental.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
tell you, he said he had that title. He was a contender for other belts. He was.
Oh, you
Had
know
all that.
what? Forgive me. I remember it more correctly now. He was actually the North American champion,
That's
which
it.
they
That's it.
renamed when Pat Patterson got it.
That's it. Yeah, yeah. He wins it in
Or he
it was
was the
that
tournament in Rio de Janeiro.
tournament.
Exactly right. Yeah, right. The
Yeah, but that wasn't. But DiBiase, whether a good guy or like a bad guy in Mid South was still a standard wrestler, and then he comes in as $1 Million Man. But even then, he's still working like Ted DiBiase.
yeah.
Now that I look back at what I didn't know that part before, but looking back at it, he was a consistently good worker. His matches stood out for being very good. Rick Rude was another one who got better too as his career went along. By the time Rick Rude is like career-ending injury, he's on top of his game as a worker in WCW. And I kind of overlooked, some of the bad guys, especially. I overlooked how good they were at carrying a match.
Right.
But
Right.
WBF was WBF during the expansion and after is just overloaded with guys. Like you said, if you change the names,
But you have to feel, other than the fact that this was the steroid era and heavy drug use era, if we're going to the 80s and early 90s, but look at it this way. Look at the sheep herders becoming the bushwhackers. It had to be
bloody.
so much easier for them just to play a comedy routine
They
for
say it is
3-minute
in the book
matches.
from John
And
Crowther.
but 2 years before that, they were the bloodiest act in wrestling.
Bloody 5-star match, fight
Yeah.
the Fantastics,
Yeah.
like 15 years of bloody wrestling behind them.
And all of a sudden, they're children's characters. Only Vince McMahon.
But he nailed that because they were in the WWF for a long time too. Like they were in there for like 7 or 8
Yeah.
or 9
And you know
years.
what? They were never
rubbing heads.
They were
licking
never
heads.
promoted as championship contenders. They were there to entertain. Little 4-minute
They could
match.
lose and nothing would happen to them.
Right.
They
right.
come out and still do the same.
Yeah.
The silly walk and the licking heads, and that was a smart. Like there were some things McMahon did that I think you might like say, they made them a less serious outfit, but there were some things he came up with that meant like 10 years of easy paychecks for a guy.
But that's what I'm thinking. It had to be easier than the NWA style or the Mid South style.
Definitely that style.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's some guys that kept up the bumps. Like Kurt Hennig comes in and he's still taking those.
He was still the
bumps.
same. Yeah.
But that's his style. But the Bushwhackers come in and it's like a night off for them forever.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll never forget the day we're talking about Steve Kern. Apter's telling me.
He said, "Yeah." Steve Kern says that style's a night off.
But Apter's telling me in the office, I'm sitting there, you go, hey, Bob, the WWE just signed, or WWF just signed Steve Kerr. I said, really? He said, yeah, they're going to call him, he's going to be an alligator guy. They're going to call him Skinner. I went, what? I said, Lady Killer Steve Kerr is going to be like a tobacco chewing gator hustler. And
What's wild is
what
that's
it was.
truer to his real self.
It
As he
actually
points out,
was. Yeah.
he's like a Florida guy. And actually, he was not a lady killer, but he was a guy that knew how to trap gators.
It was really true. I learned that through his book and from talking. He was on the show a
Yeah.
few weeks ago, and I was
He's
like,
a good
holy
talker.
smokes.
And some of the guys,
I hope he continues to be used in the backstage somewhere.
he's
These older guys, the Cornettes, the Steve Kearns, Kevin Sullivan, who just died, should have been backstage somewhere working with the younger wrestlers, because you're never going to get a better education than you are from the veterans.
well, and Steve, when I talked to him, or when Ian has talked to him extensively, always it's not like they loved like the past and only the past. Like they kept up with Kevin Sullivan's another one. They kept up with modern pro wrestling and they knew what the trends were. And like Steve Kern, adopted a lot of things that that weren't territorial. Like just like Vince McMahon, he liked a big muscular wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
You get a guy with $1 million butt. Like he had done the work himself. During the Fabulous Ones era of having that great build, so he knew what he wanted to see out there. Like that kind of thinking is still like those guys are still with it. Like they and Kevin Sullivan. I mean, just like every possible modern angle that they're throwing out now, the Wyatt stuff, the current Wyatt family stuff, like that's all Kevin Sullivan. It's just Kevin Sullivan.
It is. It really is. It really is. I hate it, but it's Kevin Sullivan. I actually
some little guy from Boston that just
there's a
pieced it all
reason
together himself.
I saw the Florida stuff. His Army of Darkness, whatever they called it, and he worked up in the East in ICW doing the same shtick. That didn't offend me as much as the Wyatts do. The Wyatt Six does. And I know it's supposed to be a tribute to Bray and so on and so forth, but strip away the people from the gimmick, and I thought that Bray Wyatt was just the drizzling shits. I'm sorry. I just when you present something that obviously over the top, unreal, fake, whatever you want.
WWF has always done that.
Yeah, I mean it just taints the rest of the cards to me.
I would never book it that way. I was kind of ruined by, and I know WCW or would try to do this a little bit in the later years, and they would do it. But I was kind of ruined by like the Southern promotions might have a weird gimmick, but it would always have some element of realism to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like you might bring in Abdullah, right, or something like that, and you're like, well, is this guy a maniac? Is he crazed? But they wouldn't like put the Wyatt production values behind him.
Right.
I know they did the crazy match where he gets electrocuted in the chair and all that.
But you know what? Even that, everybody went, "Come on!" Everybody in the business went, "Come on!"
Still a step too far.
Yeah, it was a step too far. Yeah.
But because all you need with Abdullah is to him carve up. Like to me, like you can have a crazy kind of gimmick like that. And I think Sullivan, like I was watching the Sullivan Florida footage as I was doing the piece. I think he kind of towed the line pretty well because there was only stuff they couldn't do all that. They couldn't do all that. They could only work with what they had. So like, Kevin Sullivan could do his weird ranting and Mark Lewin could kind of linger in the background and stuff. Mm-hmm. And, that was about as far as you could go with it. Maybe like bury Billy Graham in the sand. But
they did some extreme stuff even on TV. At one point, they stabbed Mulligan in a chest.
They hang or crucify Billy Graham.
They hang Billy Graham. They stabbed Blackjack Mulligan in the chest with a broken beer bottle. There's another time that they do a similar thing with Dusty Rhodes. He spiked him in the chest.
But that's still pretty. I mean, that to me is still kind of like cool in the proto ECW way versus what
Yeah,
the Wyatt stuff.
But it was still extreme for its moment.
Yes,
you know what I'm
interesting.
saying?
Like if I also see something once or twice, I'm, like kind of like it, also knowing that kind of Kevin Sullivan just kind of cooks it up on his own and brings other people into it. Mm-hmm. I'm more inclined to be okay with that as a fan or as a watcher of it than if I know like a whole creative team is not that I know there's some fans that love this, but the more production you put behind it and the more creative teams and you have like horror writers scripting it or whatever, right. I'm going to tune out. That doesn't like that is for some people, but it's not for me. I just want to watch, to me, like nowadays, especially, like I want to watch, if I'm watching pro wrestling, give me like Chad Gable watch wrestling an Olympic style match with, one of their other like young wrestling signees and have some really good suplexes in that match.
Good
Let
luck
me
with
see
this.
that.
Good luck, because that's not what they're doing with him right
No,
now. And
no,
how
they're
about
just burying him.
right? And how about the friggin' debut of the Wyatt Six? It's the gorilla position, and there's smoke pots. Okay, how fake is this? These smoke pots. Where do these smoke pots come from? It takes a crew to put smoke pots
You're
in to
asking
make them
questions
work.
like a 1980s fan.
Yeah, but that's who I am. I'm an old guy. You know what? What do you want me to say? A little bit of common sense behind these things would make it just much more palatable.
Today,
Now,
you have to
I
believe.
understand the Wyatts wrestled this past week, and they actually took their gimmicks off, and they look like wrestlers. I got no problem with that. But let's
Decent match. I hate to see the Creed brothers, who I think are the best young act wrestling wise, one of the best young acts out there. I hate to see them doing the job for anybody, but
too late.
so be it.
Hey,
I mean,
are you keeping up on the new stuff?
what I do now is if it's I record it, because I might do an article, and sometimes it might come up where, something happens at the Ringer or one of the other places I write for, where they're like, oh, why don't you write about what amateur wrestlers are doing in wrestling right now, or something like that. And that's something I'm keeping up with. Or why don't you write about what like muscle wrestlers are doing right now? Like I've done a couple things on Bobby Lashley over the years because I've enjoyed. Bobby Lashley's the kind of guy I would book on top just because he's got the look. Or Brian Cage in AEW, the big muscle look that can also move.
Mm-hmm.
I would book that on top just because that's what I like. So I'll do a piece like that, but I can't watch the stuff as a story. I can't. Well, I'll fast forward to the guys I want to see.
Oh, that's me. That's me in a nutshell, Jack.
But that's like some of the stuff, and like those guys are very, very good. But this other stuff, I think it's for somebody, but it's not for me as entertainment because I have the same like like the stuff with like the smoke and the effects and all that. The fans today, I guess, are just expected to accept. They're not supposed to question it. They're like, well, of course it's fake. We're just doing special effects.
Right. But you know
this is just what? Okay.
I'll take Gunta 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. I love it. He's like the new Killer Kowalski.
He has a good 20-minute match. He does look like Killer Kowalski. That is the physique that he looks like.
Yeah, he's the 2024 Killer Kowalski.
It's that build after he lost the weight. He went from having the build of kind of like a Stan Hansen type of guy to looking about like Killer Kowalski. That's what he looks like.
I'm looking at Facebook about a month ago, and somebody put the pictures of young Gunta and Damian Priest up, and I was like,
Damian Priest is fat too.
Yeah,
Damian's put in the work.
Boy, they both have. I got to give him credit. I mean,
Damian's old too. He's like in his 40s, and he got the belt.
Well,
Gunther's not young.
Everybody was complaining, well, LA Knight's too old. He's 41, and he's too old to be a champion. And then all of a sudden, it was discovered that Damian Priest was the exact same age.
I actually think LA Knight looks like $1 million.
He does.
Yeah, he would have fit in perfectly in the 80s. People, I know Vince thought he was a little too old. That was the rumor or something. So they wanted to make him a manager. He's gotten in better shape since he dropped the manager gimmick. And the stuff he does, like he does the box jump suplex where he jumps up on the top rope. That is a nice move. He jumps to the top rope from the ground. He's got a couple other things like that that's real athletic stuff.
But there's the thing. He's jumping from a standing position. There was not a run before it. He just levitates. It's amazing.
He looks really, and like for 41, he's avoided injuries, as he said, over the years. So he's probably got a couple more years of doing that. But I actually think his wrestling is good enough that his talking's good. He does. He's like, he would have worked fine in the 70s and 80s because all those guys kind of did the same version of the same promo. It's just who did it better. Like Dusty and Billy Graham did like a very similar promo.
Yeah, I think.
LA Knight sounds like The Rock a little bit, but he does a good version of it, and then he gets in the ring, and he's actually very credible. So
yeah,
I think I like watching his matches. I think he and Logan Paul had a great match. I think he makes everybody he's wrestling. He made Bray Wyatt look really good when Bray Wyatt came back, but the thing is, he made himself in that angle. Like they realized he was actually a talent,
and that's impossible.
I don't know how he did it.
No, I know for LA Knight to actually become an equal in popularity with Bray Wyatt at that time
during that
was
feud,
making a comeback, unbelievable. It took three promos, and LA Knight was a star just then and there.
Those promos are incredible. Like he did all the LA Knight stuff. Then he did something where he came out dressed or holding a lamp like Bray, and it just killed.
Yeah.
I was like, that guy's going to be. At that point, I hadn't seen anybody get over like that. I was like, that guy's going to be a world champ.
Mm-hmm.
And he might be. Yeah, he won the U.S. belt. He deserved it. But he's had the world title matches. He's gone further than you could have. But I actually don't think it's like that surprising when you look at him.
Right.
Like he's got the physique. He could have worked in the 80s. He could have worked. He's not short. He could have worked in the 80s. He could have worked in the 90s. That's a gimmick that could have worked. It's like Rick Rude could work in today. Like Rick Rude, you could take Rick Rude the 80s and the 90s, 2000s today. That's a guy that did all the basics of wrestling, good villain, and would get heat. He'd get heat today with that same routine.
Well, Oliver, this quick hour, man. It flew by, didn't it?
Fun, Bob.
Yeah, me too. I had a blast.
I love chatting about the old, but talking to somebody that was part of the old stuff that I read.
Oh gosh, dude! Like I said, I started watching wrestling and informing what it was in my mind in 1970. So my knowledge base goes way the hell back. Mostly East Coast from then. But I started reading wrestling magazines at the age of 11 or 12. So it's like I used to have stacks of those, and I'm telling you, all led to where I ended up.
But it's funny too, because you would have been at some point reading the stuff after is helping to orchestrate. Then you're working with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, and then it's all one big string.
I'll tell you, that job was such a fluke. I've said this a million times on the show, but I'll tell you one more time how I got that job. Just this simple. So I'm sitting here with a major of journalism, or with Mike Tyson in my lap, and I'm reading the New York Times. And back in 1988, the New York Times had 4 pages of editorial jobs in it, in the want ads. 4 pages.
Huh.
And I see a 2-line ad, editor/writer in bold, for Sports Entertainment Pub. And I went, sports entertainment, that's wrestling. Then it said, send resume/clips to box something, RBC, New York. I said, RBC? That's Rockville Center. That's PWI. So I put my Tyson stuff and a few other clips, sent it to them, and the phone rang 2 days later. The rest is history. Oh. That's a fluke, Jack. I was working for a magazine at that point called Pro Sound News. I was writing about musical cables in New York City. I had a couple city jobs before I got that one, but I left them immediately as soon as PWI.
Those were the bread and butter type writing jobs of that era.
Oh yeah,
Watch Digest Monthly and
it was good.
Car Industry Weekly.
Hey, listen, good solid work. And if you notice, if you go to a Barnes and Noble, the magazines that are making it are all niche.
They're still, well, those are still the one. Those trade things are still
watch time, crocheting, running, walking, crawling, muling, barking. It's all a niche because they're the places where you can get information that other publications won't have. So I think the only people making money are the 50,000 circulation magazines that keep their costs low. Because printing is through the roof, Jack. This is why I can't go back to print publishing. It's dying. And it's not dying 100% because of the internet. Print costs have gone up so exponentially year by year that it's virtually impossible to make an affordable magazine now. Sports Illustrated like $9 a copy now or something like that.
It's just like comic books. I used to be a comic book fan too. Now they're $6-7 an issue for 22 pages of copy. You can't like that's not feasible. And when we do print stuff at work, like, bound PDFs and stuff like that, bound, like that's a loss leader. That's for trade shows.
Right.
We do a nice glossy thing of our research, but that's not for, you know what I mean? Like print is entirely a luxury a lot of times.
It is. It is. Well, it's been a luxury having you on this show, my friend, my new friend. And I'll tell you what, hype yourself for a couple of minutes.
Well, if people want to see more of my stuff, go to oliverbateman.com. at Mustache Club US on Twitter. You can see I got a Substack. Oliver Bateman does the work. Substack.com. Just go to my site, oliverbateman.com. You can see all the different stuff I'm working on. I love writing about wrestling and writing about muscle stuff is muscle sports, strength and fitness. That's my favorite, but I write about all kinds of things. Go check it out. And Bob, it was a ton of fun to come on the show. I'm glad you reached out just because. Yeah, I mean, there's this whole element. Like I got to talk to somebody who was making the magazines. That was sweet.
Yeah, I get that a lot. But I will say this, and I mean this, and I'm not blowing smoke at you, Oliver. To my listeners, you have to go to the Ringer. It's so good.
It's a cool site.
I just discovered it, guys. It's so good, you won't believe it. If you want real journalism as opposed to SEO fluff, go to the Ringer. I give it my highest recommendation. I'm not saying it because you're on the show. I'm saying it because I spent all day looking at it today, and it was like, you know what? That's the goods, right?
It's a site to bookmark. Every day they put out about 10 to 15 articles that are really well done, long, detailed. If you like NBA, they've always had the best NBA coverage. I'm not even a huge NBA fan, and I read their stuff on that. But they have the stuff on wrestling. They have stuff on movies. It's always nice pieces. So if you want a good mix of stuff every day, just check out their site or their Twitter feed or whatever and see what's there. They always have. It's like you said, Bob. It's longer articles. It's the kind of stuff that doesn't come out, and it's a variety.
Right. Right. And you know what? It's got a nice sleek design, easy to navigate. You're gonna love it, guys.
Yeah.
Guys my age, get to it. TheRinger.com.
Yeah.
You will thank me. I promise you. And I want to thank you again, Oliver Bateman. Appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you, Bob.
There's no excuses here, but I'm quite the busy chap. And I have been very amiss in not reading listener mail. So here's our new theme song for listener mail. That's it. All right. Well, money's money. $50 is $50. Anyway, here's some listener mail for you. It's from a fine gentleman named Phil Becker of Fresno, California. And he wrote way back in July, and we're just getting around to this now. So, Phil, I apologize, but here we go. Hey there, Bob. Love the show. I had to reach out and ask you one quick question. What's the phenomenal jazzy trombone song that played at the beginning of your 1980s Top 100 episode from May 16th? Well, as you may have noticed, that's our regular theme song now. And it is called Funky Bone by an artist called MRB, which stands for Moran Ron Barron. And you can find him on SoundCloud and on YouTube, but I have to tell you, I can't find Funky Bone anywhere. And here's probably why. I literally pay for and license the music that I play in the show. And perhaps this is not for public consumption. This may be meant as, studio music or film music or something like that. But in any event, I got the rights to it, and I'm using it, and I love it. And I'm going to continue to play the truncated version at the beginning of the show and the full version at the end. So anyway, Phil, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Going to read more listener mail as soon as I get the opportunity to. So if you send something, listen up. You may hear it right here. Okay, let's tie a little bow on this one if we can. In any event, I really hope you enjoyed Oliver Lee Bateman, and I want you to go enjoy the Ringer. You will not, you'll thank me. You're going to thank me. The site is tremendous. Serious stuff. When I record these shows, my knees knock, not when I interview a wrestler. It's when I interview these amazing writers like Oliver Bateman, Joe Puccio, Javier Oist, Ian Douglas, Brian R. Solomon, and on the list goes. I'm just in awe of these people. They're doing what I used to do, only they're doing it better than I ever did it. I'll tell you that right now. So if you read those names, stick with them because they are tremendous writers. They've all got books and articles coming out. Just keep your eye on those names. They're fantastic. If you're a thinking man's wrestling fan, they are for you. Here's a tip for you guys. You ready for a tip? Now, we've spared no expense bringing a fancy introduction for this, so here it is.
Ta-da!
What, that's it? That's the fancy introduction? All right, I have a couple of tips for you. Number one, very fine fellow by the name of Kevin Orcutt. Go on YouTube. He has a bunch of terrific wrestling videos joining the ranks of like the Dave Dynasties and the Crispy Lettuces of the world, better known as Armstrong Alley to many of you. Kevin has found tremendous old-time wrestling videos, particularly from the Roy Shire promotion. And the stuff's awesome. It looks like it's from an old VHS because it is from an old VHS, but it's well worth looking at. Roddy Piper and Moondog Mayne and Dean Ho and Harley Race, a whole mess of great stars on those tapes. More and more and more. And thank you, Kevin Orcutt, for making YouTube even better. Just great stuff. Tip number 2, I'm writing again. Now, anyone who knows me knows this is going to sound funny, but my friend Bill Apter called me. When he asks me to do something, I have a tendency to do it because Bill and I go back all those years, and I don't want to shake the guy. He's a tremendous talent. And as you know, he works for the Sportskeeda wrestling website. Now I'm doing a column, or I'm helping do a column for Bill called Bill Apter Presents WrestleCopia. It's just kind of his news of the day, and I always do nostalgia. Now, you go, Sportskeeda, what, Bob, why would you do that? I'll tell you why. They've told me I don't have to do SEO writing. I can write whatever I want. So I'm doing little bits in this column with every new edition. We're going to our third or fourth one now. There should be one out anytime you want to see it, and you can subscribe to it. It comes right to your email box. So go to Sportskeeda Wrestling and find Bill Apter Presents WrestleCopia. It's just plain fun, and it's got Bill's flavor to it, and I can't say no to Bill Apter. So for the time being, I'm going to help contribute a few words in his column. So look for that. OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com is our website. All of our episodes are there. We're available on most podcast apps. Please subscribe if you can. Write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Find me on Facebook. I'm Singing with BB King. You can also find me on Twitter and Threads. Also on OutdatedWrestlingHour.buzzsprout.com. You can find out about our fan club, the Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. Read all about that on that website. And you can listen to all of our shows there too. I will never Patreon old shows. They're there for you to listen for free as long as I continue to do the show. So listen if you can. I would appreciate that. So in any event, I think that's good for now. I don't think I've forgotten anything. I think I got everything in there. I'm starting to really resemble my staff announcer. I am telling you, boy, oh boy, oh boy. So in any event, I better have a hot toddy and go right to bed, get my stocking cap and my socks. So anyway, I'm Bob Smith, the host of the Outdated Wrestling Hour these days. And like Ringo Starr says, peace and love, brothers and sisters.